Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Hans Blix, who is the former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. This was between 1981 and 1997. You were then at the head of the arms inspector team in Iraq prior to the US intervention in early 2003. Welcome to the France 24 interview. We'll begin with maybe a parallel that some people are drawing between what you saw in Iraq and what is happening now with Iran. After the US intervention, you criticized the US and the UK for exaggerating the threat of weapons of mass destruction. Are we seeing the same thing today with Iran?
Well, of course, the war that was started in 2003 was on weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. And today we are asking ourselves whether the threat of use of force against Iran is against ambitions that may or may not exist. So there is a similarity. But there are also differences between the two situations. Iraq in 2003 was militarily down. They had no power whatever. They were not a danger to anybody at all. They certainly had hardly anything nuclear. In the case of Iran today, yes, Iran has a lot of military power and they have a lot of nuclear activities, two reactors that operate, a research reactor, enrichment going, etc. So there are big differences. But as to the object of a possible attack, well, there's an uncertainty in both cases.
From your point of view, you're obviously an expert for so many years. Is Iran pursuing a military nuclear program or, as Iran is saying, only a civilian one?
I don't think the point is proven, actually. The US intelligence has been saying that after 2003, there has not been a weapons program. And I see in the Herald Tribune today that the Israeli intelligence seems to be on the same side. Whereas many people, I think, would say that, yes, we think they actually were trying to get a weapon. However, in some ways, I don't think it's so important, the fact. This is a quarreling about a guilt, and should they be punished? But the most important is, what do we do to the future? I mean, the fact is that whether they are trying to make a weapon or not, the tension has gone up with the industrialization of enriched uranium. Because if you can enrich to 4%, as they can, or to 20% as they do, then you can also enrich to 94%, which would be weapons grade. So it's more important, I think, to ask ourselves, what is to be done in the future? Should they continue to enrich, which the P5 plus 1, the new big states, do not want, or should they somehow be talked out of the enrichment?
What's your point of view?
I think it would be desirable that they renounce the enrichment, but I think also that it's clear that under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, enrichment is permissible. They are not violating the law necessarily unless they intend to go for a weapon. But I don't think they are violating the law. Prima facie, they have a right to enrich. So if they are to step out of it because it would reduce the tensions, then I think it's absolutely normal that they should be able to ask for something on the other side. And it is true that the other side has offered a variety of things. They say, if you renounce enrichment, which you don't really need because we can give you an assurance of supply of fuel, then we are ready to give you support for getting into the World Trade Organization or support for building up the peaceful nuclear sector, light water reactors, etc. And there are other things that they could do. Now, all these things are good, but I think one thing that Iran would want to and would be important would be if they could also get Israel walking out of the nuclear weapons. The Israelis would laugh at that today and say that's utterly impossible. But I think that everybody actually would gain by it. If you have the Middle East a zone in which no one has weapons and no one has enrichment plants and reprocessing plants.
But Israel will never accept that.
Well, I think I saw an opinion poll in Israel not long ago in which a majority said that they would prefer a Middle East in which no one had nuclear weapons to two states in the Middle East having nuclear weapons. So I think that the closer you get to a risk of further countries, perhaps Egypt or Saudi Arabia going for nuclear weapons, the more interesting this proposition becomes to Israel. But it's a difficult one. It requires guarantees of access to fuel and security guarantees and inspection, etc. A lot of things require. But at the end of this year, 2012, there will be probably a conference in Helsinki in accordance with the decision of the UN to discuss the idea of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction.
Aren't you afraid that this will be too late? There are so many war noises coming out of Jerusalem, but also of Washington. How serious is the threat of a war?
You are perfectly right that this is not for tomorrow, but it is for something for 2012, I would say. Right today, the tension is enormous, and there could be a war even within the next few months. Netanyahu came out the other day and said that it's not a question of days or weeks, but it's also not a question of years. So he was actually threatening, say that within a year's time, there could be an attack, whether by Israel or the United States, or Israel pushing the United States. This is an imminent risk. And I think that for that reason, the aim right now would have to be rather modest. The P5, the big countries, they have dug down their heels very much, and Iran too has dug down its heels very much. So what one can expect would be some very modest steps. For instance, if the Iranians were to say that we intend to remain parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we intend to remain party to the Safeguards Agreement with the IAEA and continue to invite the inspectors to come to our enrichment plant both in Natanz and Fordow. And if the other side were to say that we are asking Iran to the table to discussions, not just to ask them to sort of be forgivens and to give up and renounce enrichment, but to discuss what interest do they have, a real negotiation. Because I think often you have had a very almost neo-colonial tone vis-à-vis Iran, and that is not very good. If you say Iran must behave itself, well, you can be pretty sure that you will not get a positive reply.
So you don't totally share the criticism of the West. They say they cannot trust Iran. Even the current general director of the IAEA says Iran is hiding things from us. So there is this issue of Western mistrust of Iran. You say it's exaggerated, that there should be more willingness to listen.
As an old inspector, I wouldn't really trust anybody. So I can understand the West not being very confident about what Iran does. But I think I can also see that Iran doesn't trust very much for the West. Iran actually did renounce and did suspend enrichment for a period of 2 years. And thereafter they got proposals from the West that they thought were very poor. So I think mistakes have been committed from both sides, and I think they now need to look forward. Because if we were to have a war now, if there were to be an attack on Iran, well, then what would follow the day after the war? It's easy to start the war, but what happens the day after? Secondly, what be the justification for the war? I mean, about the Iraq war, there was a lot of discussion, was this a violation of the UN Charter? And Kofi Annan and I too felt it was a violation of the UN Charter.
And this would be a violation in this case?
I think it would be, because under the UN Charter, it would be permissible to launch an attack on Iran if Iran has launched an armed attack on somebody else. Whatever Ahmadinejad has said, Iran has not launched an attack on anybody. Secondly, if the Security Council were to authorize an armed intervention, well, it's okay. However, the Security Council is not going to authorize action against Iran, and if they were to take it over the General Assembly, I'm sure there would be an overwhelming majority that would go against any attack on Iran.
What's Washington's position right now? Do they support an Israeli attack?
No, I think that Washington, Obama administration, I should say, not Washington, but Obama administration does not want to have a war. And they have a different position from Israel. Obama's position is that if a nuclear weapon is being made, then they will intervene. But they do not see that happening. They see that Iran getting a capacity, but not actually making a weapon. The Israeli and Netanyahu position is that already building up a capacity is sufficient to strike. So there is a difference between the two, and certainly the Obama administration tries to avoid a war. They are trying to get out of 2 wars in the Middle East, and they don't want to get into a third one.
If Israel was to launch an attack, would it be successful?
Well, I think the Israelis wouldn't do it unless they felt that it would be successful.
Some people say it's too difficult.
Yes, yes, it probably is very difficult, and some people doubt that they could make it. I think they would pinpoint nuclear installations, not anything else. But the problem is that even if they were to destroy, say, Natanz, which has an enrichment plant, then what will happen in 2 years' time? Surely the Iranians have prototypes of the centrifuges. They would have produced enough centrifuges, and in a couple of years' time they would be back at it. I mean, would the Israelis attack once more then? I mean, it's not really future. Israel has followed this model. They did it in 1981 against the Osirak reactor that was French-built, and then they went to Syria in 2007. Now they are thinking of Iran. If Saudi Arabia builds a research reactor enrichment, or Egypt does it, would Israel also attack those? I mean, I don't think there is a future in attack after attack. I think they have to find a way of an agreement with Iran. And I think that the Israeli giving up of the nuclear weapons, that might do it.
For now, that's obviously not the strategy. There's also talk of cyber attacks against Iran and assassination of nuclear scientists in Iran. Do you think Israel is clearly behind those attacks?
Well, I don't have evidence, but it's very commonly assumed that these assassinations have had links to some secret service in Israel. And we also remember that with the Iraqi nuclear program in the past, there were scientists who were assassinated. And I think this is a horrible technique. I think it blurs the difference between civilians and military personnel in war.
Is this terrorism?
Yes, I think it's state terrorism or shady activities, and I think it is counterproductive. I cannot prove it's Israel, but I think it probably does damage to the reputation of Israel.
Okay. Hans Blix, thank you very much for coming on the France 24 interview, and thank you all for watching this edition. Stay tuned here for more news.